Well, it's an honor to have our next guest here who is going to teach us how to turn off our fat switch. And some of you have already read his first book, The Fat Switch, which he published in 2012. And now our honored guest, Dr. Richard Johnson, has another book out called Nature Wants Us to Be Fat, the surprising science behind why we gain weight and how we can prevent and reverse it, which will come out in February 8th, 2022. And I really was blown away with his first book. And I'm super excited to talk to him about his new book because he's got some exciting new information from his research to share with us. And Dr. Johnson, to give you a bit of background, he works at the University of Colorado in Denver as a professor of medicine. And he's been keeping super busy these last 25 years, not only as a professor, but also both as a practicing physician and a clinical scientist. I mean, that's quite the load here. and he studies nothing else but, well, actually, he does studies a lot of things, but we're going to talk about his favorite thing to study, which is our favorite drug, sugar. He is super well known in the medical circles for his research into obesity and diabetes. And he found out exactly how sugar causes obesity and how our bodies can actually make fructose from other foods. And he also found out that a byproduct of fructose metabolism called uric acid plays a huge role in metabolic syndrome. And the National Institute of Health has been funding his research since the 1980s. So he's been doing this for quite a while. And he's a member of the American Society for Clinical Investigation and has published over, get this, 700 papers. And he's lectured in over 45 countries. And he's highly cited. He's a highly cited scientist. So just PubMed him, which I did, and I was blown away. Like they're all there. And so I think we're speaking with somebody who is highly, highly qualified to talk about this topic. So now, without further ado, meet Dr. Richard Johnson. Welcome.
Hi, Zora. That's a very nice introduction for me. I'm embarrassed, but it's a pleasure to be on your show, and it's a pleasure for me to kind of share with you some of the things that we've been, discovering and looking into and trying to figure out.
Well, this is really groundbreaking. Your work is groundbreaking, and it's been blowing me away ever since I found the first book. And I want to give people a little bit of a background as well, because well, first I would like you to talk a little bit about how you even got onto this path, because you started out as a kidney doctor, right?
Well, yeah, if you go way back when I was in college, I was really into anthropology and archaeology and history and nature, the biology of nature. And I wasn't headed towards medicine at all. But my father, who's an academic physician, told me, he said, you should really check out medicine because there's a great joy to taking care of patients. And I thought about that, and I thought, well, that would be a wonderful field to go into. And I went into medicine, and I became a physician, and I was on the wards as a resident, and I was taking care of patient after patient. And there is so much joy with helping people, and I really enjoyed that part of it. But I began to realize I was like in a battlefield, because the hospital was filled with patients suffering from different diseases like the wounded. And in this case, the enemy was the disease. And they actually carried both the disease as well as the consequences and the inflictions from it. And I thought to myself, I can manage all these patients and take care of them. But what if we go after the disease itself? We could probably try to help a lot more people if we could figure that out. So there, of course, I became not just a physician, but a physician scientist. And I started studying kidney diseases and hypertension and as my initial. And I would, drill down all the scientists, you take an aspect of high blood pressure or kidney disease or obesity, and you drill down, you try to become the world expert on that, on one facet of it. and you learn more, and you realize that the field of obesity and diabetes, that there's so much science that has been done, and there's so much insights that have been made, and we understand exactly what type 2 diabetes is and how the insulin resistance is occurring. And we've developed 20 different medicines to improve diabetes, and we now have specialists just managing diabetes. And we've learned how to treat heart disease. We've learned about the atherosclerotic plaque and how it can form clots and cause reduced blood flow and cause the muscle and the heart to die, a heart attack. We've learned how to treat the pain, how to give agents to block the clotting, how to give drugs to reduce the cholesterol, and all those things. And we have a huge armamentarium, so we can take a patient with heart disease and we can give them 10 medications. We can put stents in their blood vessels. We can replace the heart if we have to. I mean, it's amazing of how much we know and what we know and how to manage it. But there's a big missing aspect. And the missing aspect is, what's actually causing these conditions? Why are the wards filled with these patients? Why was it that in 1900, diabetes was 2 cases, 1 case per 50,000 people, and now it's like 12%? Why are these diseases clustered together? Then, the same thing goes for obesity. I mean, we now know so much about the, energy balance and what drives obesity, but we've developed hundreds of diets, and there's vegan diets, and there's meat diets, and there's low carb diets, and there's diets that do good carbs and bad carbs. I mean, it is confusing, but they all seem to work to some extent to lose weight, but then it's hard to keep the weight down, and everyone regains it. It seems like there's something missing. So I think many people have thought of this. It isn't just me doing this, but I'm telling you how I dealt with this. And so I had been drilling down on kidney disease and high blood pressure and making some discoveries, at the basic science level. And so I really was in the battlefield, as you say, both with the patients but I started reading about other approaches, and there's a scientist named Stephen Benner who has talked about that the best way to solve a problem is not to just take it on in one direction, but to come at it from multiple directions. And I realized that that an aerial view was better than digging into a minute little area of science, that it was better to like get in a hot air balloon and go up above and bring in all the fields, history, archaeology, evolutionary biology, comparative physiology, where you look at nature in the wild, and to use all of those areas to tap into, and not just do the classic laboratory mouse study and the classic clinical trial. And from that, we had some really major insights. And probably the major one is that obesity is not necessarily a disease. That metabolic syndrome, insulin resistance, is not really a disease. That rather, it's a process that is, in some situations, is normal, it's desired. And the big insight was really realizing that many animals in the wild purposely become obese as a means to survive. And obesity, and why is that? Well, cold winters. I don't know if you lived Zora, if you lived in the north where at any time in your life where there's like serious winters. But animals have to survive those winters, and some of them migrate away, and some of them hibernate or find ways to live under really difficult situations. And the same thing is, actually like in Madagascar, there's a dry season where the water is, it's hard to find water. It's hard. And there are animals that will hibernate in the heat, what we call estivation. It's basically hibernation, but it's not because it's cold. But and these animals, in order to survive, they have to have a way to keep their, a way to find energy to survive on. If there's no food, where do they get their energy? And fat is a form of stored energy. Because when you burn fat, you actually make the energy you need to drive the processes that you need to live, to walk, to talk. And we call that energy ATP. That's kind of the magic name. It's ATP, and it's the energy all animals use to do whatever they need to do. So if you're going to talk, you're going to walk, you're going to think, all that requires energy. And so what happens is these hibernating animals and birds that have to migrate long distances where they won't stop for 10,000 kilometers and they'll go across an ocean, they have to be able to survive. So they store fat before they go. And that process is like a switch. This is what's really interesting. They will stay normal weight throughout the summer. They don't want to be fat, much of the time, because if you're fat, you can't run as fast, right? And and there's always predators and things like that. So they keep a normal weight. If they eat more one day, they eat less the next. If they burn more calories one day, they rest the next day. They know how to keep their energy even. If you can feed them, you can force feed them food during the summer. And as soon as you enforce them to gain weight, and then you quit the force feeding, and they go right back to their regular weight. You can starve them. I love animals, but if you take away the food from them for a while and they lose weight, you stop it. They go right back to their normal weight. They know exactly where their normal weight is, and then in the fall, suddenly. And the question is, what triggers it? Suddenly, they start to gain weight. They start eating 2-3 times more than they normally do. Some animals will double their fat, double their weight. The penguin, before it nests, that's another time. When you're nesting, you can't eat. So the emperor penguin, will get hugely fat. And then it will waddle inland, and it will nest for a couple months, on its egg. It will hold its egg between its feet and its bottom, and it will live off its fat. And so so this was the big breakthrough, was to really understand that these animals are gaining fat for purpose, for a good thing. And so it made you kind of wonder, if we could figure out how they're gaining fat as a good process, maybe we can look at that from the standpoint of humans and how what's driving them to become fat.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of the big thing. And then, the next big I can't call it a discovery because I think it was known by many people, but it was kind of a big insight. Let's put it that way. Big insight for me was the realization that it's not just fat; it's an orchestrated process where they're doing other things too. So when in the fall, when these animals, suddenly start gaining weight, they are hungry. They become hungry even when they're eating too much. They keep searching for food. We call it foraging. They'll go into areas where they may not normally go to find food. They do some risk taking, and they novelty kind of seeking, and they have to move around fast, and they can't deliberate, and they can't concentrate on anything very long because they act like they're starving. And they become insulin resistant. Yeah,
Yeah.
I learned when I was in medical school, insulin resistance was a disease.
Yeah.
The phrase was the pathophysiology. Patho means diseased. So it was like something that was not supposed to happen. Insulin resistance is like not supposed to happen. We're supposed to stay insulin sensitive. But these animals purposely become insulin resistant. And it was kind of figured out before me, why that might be. And it's worthy to talk about it because insulin resistance is the forerunner of diabetes. And we think of that as, diabetes is a disease.
Mm.
But insulin resistance is actually a pretty normal behavior for animals preparing for a food shortage. And what happens is insulin is a hormone, of course, and it drives glucose into cells. And once the glucose gets into the cell, it uses the glucose to make energy and to make fat and all kinds of things. And glucose is the main carbohydrate in our blood, and it's the main carbohydrate fuel. People love, all animals use glucose as a major fuel. And so it circulates in our blood, and it's at a certain concentration. And what happens is, if you don't have any food around, the glucose can be, it's a problem because you can start burning the glucose, and if you're not replacing it with food, you have to replace it other ways, and you can break it, make it from breaking down protein and stuff. But it would be ideal if you could minimize how much glucose you need when you're starving or when there's not food around. I mean, it would help you live longer if you could maintain your glucose stores. So what happens is when an animal knows that there's going to be a period of food shortage, it changes its biology so that the muscle doesn't take up as much of the glucose, so that there's more of it for the brain. And the way that happens is that the muscle uses insulin to get glucose, and insulin's important to take up the glucose in the muscle. So if the muscle becomes resistant to the insulin, then it can't take up that glucose. So the glucose ends up in the blood, and it goes up a little bit in the blood, what we know as insulin resistance, and your blood glucose goes up a little bit. And then most of the brain doesn't need insulin for glucose. And so it can use it. A lot of the brain, not all the brain, but a lot of the brain can use that glucose to help think. And that's perfect, because if you don't have enough fuel around, you want to have enough to think, because you've got to escape. If you can't think, you're dead. You can be the strongest animal in the world, but if you can't think, you're a dead duck. And so you've got to be able to think. So insulin resistance was a survival mechanism. And so once we started looking at this, we realized that that it was an orchestra. It was an orchestra of events. There's many things. Putting on fat is just one part. It'll put fat on in the tissues, in what we call adipose, your fat, around the gut. But it puts fat in the blood. That's another way to store fat. The triglycerides go up. Puts it in the liver. That's another way to store fat. Get fatty liver. Get insulin resistant. Yeah, that's another way to protect yourself. Raise your blood pressure. Yeah, that helps you keep your blood pressure high. When you don't have any food around, your blood pressure could go low. You could get lightheaded. You need to have good circulation. It causes low-grade inflammation. Inflammation, why? That's bad. But no, a low-grade inflammation may actually help you if you get an infection, because it might help fight infection. It can also backfire, which with COVID, But anyway, so all these things, happen.
It's amazing, because what I loved about your book, and you're so passionate about what you do, is you observe animals in the wild. And this is why, you look at nature to try to understand what is actually happening to us, because we are animals too. And we try to extrapolate our behaviors and our body from animals, and that's the book is laden with different animals that you present, and it's just really lovely to learn more about them. So, you mentioned that, obesity is not a bad thing and insulin resistance is normal and not such a disease. These are in animals. So, and what we gathered from what you just said is that, well, this is a survival mechanism. It's sort of a survival fat switch, as we call. We want to store fat for hibernation and for times that we don't have the food. So, how do you extrapolate all of this to humans and what's happening to us? Maybe you can explain, because in our world as humans, yeah, diabetes, obesity, fat storage is not a good thing because it's just too excessive. We don't have a hibernation and we don't have famines, at least in the modern developed world. We don't experience this, and this is where it seems to go wrong because we're not in that an ancestral way of living. So explain to us what's going
Sorry,
on.
you're totally right. So one of the first things, what we had was when we realized that this was a survival pathway. And the big question was, well, what triggers that? How are they doing it? Because if we understand what triggers it, then we can start looking at it in humans. And so that was kind of the first big question. And I do have to say I was very lucky to be able to study some hibernating animals, both at the University of Colorado and with the Swedish in Sweden, and so I was able to do some studies in these animals in addition to doing classic research. But anyway, so one of the things that we were interested in was the fact that a lot of animals, when they are getting ready to hibernate and they start gaining weight, they start eating a lot of fruit, and we always think of fruit as healthy. But fruit does contain a sugar. It contains fructose, which is also in table sugar. So table sugar is glucose and fructose together, bounded. And high fructose corn syrup is also a sweetener used in a lot of places, especially in the U.S. And it's mixed up, fructose and glucose. So glucose, we talked about, it's that main fuel in our blood. And fructose levels are in our blood, but they're very low, about 1/100th of glucose. So we never really talk about blood fructose, but we do have it. And fructose is the main sugar in fruit and honey. And that was, for years, that was the main sweets that people had before they knew about table sugar. And so animals, when they want to gain weight, a lot of them will eat fruit, but they won't eat just one fruit. They don't eat a little fruit with their dinner. They eat fruit after fruit after fruit. They can eat, a bear can eat 10,000 grapes within a 24-hour period.
Wow, they just gorge.
They just gorge. The orangutan, oh my God, it will just gorge and gorge and gorge. And these animals will then get fat from the sugar, from the fructose. They get fat. And then they can survive through. There's a fish that eats fruit.
That's crazy.
It's called the pacu fish. Yeah, it looks like a giant piranha. I mean, it's really scary looking. It looks just like a piranha, but it's about twice as big. But it eats fruit. Doesn't eat fruit. Doesn't eat fingers.
Explain how they get it.
So the way that fish works is it lives in the Amazon, and there's these floods. And when it floods, the Amazon, which is normally a river, turns into this huge, it just floods into the jungle for kilometers and kilometers. And then these fish swim under these trees that are fruit trees, and the fruit trees have it timed. They actually have it timed, if you can believe it, to drop their ripe fruit into the the fruit ripens at the time of the flood. That allows the fruit to get into the river, and then the fish eat it, and then they disperse the seeds. And then when the river recedes, then the fruit trees can start growing again, and so it's good for the cycle. But now the fish is fat, and when the river gets real narrow, it doesn't eat. It will go 4 months, 5 months without eating.
But does it have food to choose from? If it didn't maybe it prefers fruit, but this fish, could it eat, I don't know, seaweed or
Well,
bugs or
it
something?
will eat other thing. It will eat other foods for sure, but it just prefers fruit. And actually, like birds, it's been shown that they love that fall fruits and those ripe fruits. And so, and like, I always point out that the hummingbird, really it takes nectar, which is basically sugar, and it uses it to put fat on during the day when it's running around and flying around and trying to get nectar. So what happened is we realized that fructose was seemed to be used as a mechanism for driving fat. So what we did is we started giving fructose to animals like laboratory mice, and when we put it in the drinking water, instead of controlling their appetite, like normal animals will often control their appetite very well, control their weight. Once they started eating the fructose, suddenly they lost their ability to regulate their weight. They were hungry all the time. They started eating a lot more, and they became very fat, and they developed a fatty liver, and they developed insulin resistance. And we had activated the switch by giving them fructose.
As if
And
they
that
were
was
going
like
to go in hibernation, right?
exactly. But if you keep giving them the fructose, they just keep getting bigger and bigger, and then they become diabetic. The insulin resistance shifts to diabetes, and they start getting all these complications
So
related to
it's
activating the switch.
it sounds then it's like connected to the brain. It's that if it's making you forage, making you hunt for food, even though you just ate, your fructose, you ate tons of calories in fructose, and it just can't be the calories. You can't feel satiated. So there's probably something
Right.
else.
Yes, yeah, there's definitely, and we have studied that actually. There are very significant effects going on in the brain. So this is a whole body thing. And
Amazing.
so then when we started realizing that this could do it, then we said to ourselves, is it maybe it's just making you eat more, and that's what happens. It just makes you hungry, so you eat more. But we did a thing called pair feeding, and what that means is, you feed one group of animals like starch or some other kind of diet, and you give the other group a sugar diet or a fructose diet, but everybody eats the same. All the animals have to eat the same. No one gets to go back for seconds. And so the way you do that is you give all the animals as much food as they want the very first day. And then the animal that eats the least, that's how much food you put out the next day. And pretty soon, everybody eats all the food, and then you can go for several months and you can see what happens when everybody's eating the exact same number of calories. And what we found was that fructose was really, that it had effects even independent of eating of calories. So the calories were actually really important for weight gain. So if they're all eating the same calories, the weight gain in the animals was about the same. Now it turns out that as part of this switch, they drop their metabolism a little bit, especially when they're resting. They're lazy. They're like sitting around, and you can show that by laser lights. They kind of like if there was a sofa there, they would be on it. But anyway, so there is a little bit difference in weight, and I think if you went out for a year, you'd begin to see difference in weight, even with eating the same amount of food. But most of the weight gain was from eating more, and fructose wants to make you eat more. And so most of the weight gain from sugar is from eating more. But everything else, the insulin resistance, the fatty liver, the rise in the fats in the blood, those are all independent. So these animals, even though they were eating the same amount, only the fructose or sugar-fed animals developed diabetes. Only they got the big-time fatty liver when we looked at it. And so then we knew that sugar is working through two mechanisms. One was, it makes you want to eat more, but it also is doing something biologically. It's making you insulin resistant. And these things can even occur when you're on a diet. And actually, in that one experiment that I just told you about, it's kind of cool. turned out that there was one animal that was eating a lot less that first day, and so all the animals had to eat a lot less. And and so they were actually on a diet. They were like eating 80% of what they normally eat. They were all on a diet. It was lucky because we didn't intend that, but it turned out to be very powerful because the animals that got the high sugar percentage, the high sugar, they're the ones that they all became diabetic even on a diet.
No.
So yeah, they all became diabetic. You can become diabetic and you can be thin and diabetic if you eat enough sugar. And I have seen this actually in some patients that have been referred to me, where
Wow.
they think that they can get away with eating a lot of sugar but just not eat a lot of food, and they can keep their weight down, but they can't. They don't block these other things. So.
Yeah. And there's still disease.
That was the original work, and I wrote a book, and I thought, I got it, because what's going on is it's the fructose that causes obesity. This is why low carb diets work, because when you go on a low carb diet, you're reducing your fructose, and so maybe I can make a diet where we just lower the fructose, and maybe I'm going to cure obesity. So I wrote this book called The Sugar Fix. It was really the first low fructose book, and I had some people really lose weight. I had some great successes, but then I was on Jimmy Moore's podcast, and Jimmy Moore had lost like 150 pounds being on a low carb diet, and he said, Rick, he said, I went on a low sugar diet initially, but it wasn't enough. I had to reduce all my carbs. And then I thought, well, it's true. If I just go by the low fructose diet, then French fries would be safe. French
Yeah.
fries would be safe because it's starch and fat and salt. And yet I knew that French fries weren't safe. Just my gut feeling, I guess. And I found that, like, if I ate bread that myself, that I felt like that caused me weight gain. And so we started, so I had this doctor working with, or a scientist working with me, and we were talking about the fact that the body can make fructose, and it's been known that the body makes fructose, and it does in diabetes. It's known that, but we really didn't think of it as being an issue with normal diet. And Miguel Lanaspa said to me, joined my lab, and he said, I bet you that if you eat high glycemic carbs, like bread and rice and potatoes, that when the glucose goes up in the liver, and when you eat those foods, they're called high glycemic because your blood glucose actually does take a rise. And so the glucose goes up a little bit just normally after you eat those foods. And we knew from the work in diabetes that the way fructose is made, one easy way to make fructose is to raise blood glucose. If you raise the blood glucose, it activates an enzyme that converts glucose to fructose. So we realized that if people are eating a lot of carbs, that they might be making fructose. This was kind of scary, and so we did these experiments, and it was true. If you eat a lot of high glycemic carbs, your body makes fructose, and the fructose activates the switch. And if you block the fructose metabolism, you can eat starch, and you won't get fatty liver, you won't get diabetes. So you can eat if you block it. And we have animals where we knocked out the enzymes involved in fructose metabolism, so we could block fructose metabolism, and show that even foods that don't have fructose are working to cause obesity by stimulating your body to make fructose. This was really disappointing.
Yeah, it is. And it is where the story goes far in the book, but it's quite interesting. So what was interesting, you said that glucose the body will convert some of the glucose into fructose, and then it still does the same damage. But what is it then? But you did this study with the two mice. One was drinking fructose and the other one was drinking glucose, right? And there was the animals that had fructose, they had the damage, and whereas the other mice were just drinking glucose, didn't have all the metabolic syndrome damage like fatty liver disease and diabetes.
Okay, yeah, you're picking up a really good point. So let me try to explain what happened there. So when we did the starch experiment, it was starch, not glucose. We gave fructose or starch in the chow, and when we gave it in the chow, the starch will be converted to fructose, and at that time we didn't know this data, but it will take longer because it's in the chow and because it's starch. It would take longer for that animal to start making enough fructose to get into trouble. So it was just the timing that we were giving fructose versus starch. But what we've learned since is that high glycemic carbs will cause obesity over time. Now, you can make it faster if you put the glucose, if you give them glucose, not starch, and if you give the glucose in the drinking water. So when you do that, you get a higher wave of glucose to the liver. And so the higher the wave, the more fructose is made. So when you give glucose in the drinking water, you can create a fat animal fairly quickly. If you give starch, you will eventually get there, but it takes longer because that process is just slowed down. Okay? And the other thing is, it's complicated, but the more sugar you eat, the better you get at metabolizing it. So if you feed an animal a lot of sugar, you can turn on these pathways, like the conversion of glucose to fructose is activated by giving sugar. So if I give an animal sugar for like a couple months, now it's a lot more easy for it, when you give it starch, to convert the starch to fructose. So it turns out that when we're in our early life, we can't convert glucose to fructose very easily. And so in the first 20 years, when we get bread, a lot of us can eat bread, and there's nothing bad that happens, because the process of converting glucose to fructose, initially those enzymes aren't in the liver at all. In the normal animal, they don't convert the glucose to fructose. You have to kind of prime them. So if you give sugar that has like liquid, sugar breaks down to glucose and fructose, and especially if you give liquid sugars like soft drinks or fruit juice, actually, if you do that, then the animals become much more sensitive to starch, and so then they'll get fatter sooner. But if you just give, we've learned a lot of kind of interesting things about this over time, and I think also the more fructose you eat, the more sensitive you get to it. And I'm concerned about things like fruit juice, because lots of children are given fruit juice, and so they're getting kind of a liquid sugar, and then that can kind of trigger them. And as you probably know, fruit juices have been linked with obesity in children, and so the American Pediatric Society tries to limit fruit juice, and I think we know why. It's not just the amount of fructose, but it triggers these changes so that you can convert breads to fat as well.
Yeah.
And so you get fat children.
This sounds a lot like in my master's program of gerontology, I was studying with Dr. Walter Longo and genes, nutrition, longevity, and we had one lecture by Dr. Michael Gorin, who has given you a review of your book, I saw. And he gave a wonderful lecture, and he is studying childhood obesity, and what you're telling me now is just reverberating exactly what he mentioned to us as well. And it's really shocking, because in the US, we have so many children who takes in so much sugar. And like you said, it's like shooting up heroin into their bloodstream, because it goes straight to the liver when you're drinking this liquid fructose, even when it's just apple juice or orange juice. And it's frightening because we do, and I'm just as guilty raising my kids with apple juice and orange juice, thinking this is healthy for them. And
Yeah,
literally,
exactly. I mean, I thought that too, Zara. And I do believe natural fruits. We should talk about natural fruits at some point because they probably are healthy the way that we eat them, unless you like eat bowls of grapes or something. But I'll tell you another story. This I don't think I've told this story in any podcast. So, but I was very interested in this epidemic of food allergies that are occurring in children because when I was a kid, peanut allergies did happen and shrimp allergies, but it was pretty rare. But it seems like every classroom has these kids that have these anaphylactic reactions, like serious reactions to peanuts and stuff. And there was a doctor, a wonderful researcher at the University of Colorado, who studies anaphylaxis to peanuts, and he uses a mouse that is sensitive to developing peanut allergies. But the trick is the trick to making an animal allergic is you've got it, the peanuts, some of the peanut proteins have to actually get through the intestine into the blood. And we call that a leaky gut. You have to have like a leaky gut so that when you eat proteins, normally when you eat peanuts, you just would completely break them down and then absorb the nutrients. But if you have a leaky gut, you can get larger amounts of proteins into the blood, and then if you're predisposed, you have to be predisposed, then you can develop an allergic reaction that can be anaphylactic. And he had these mice that were predisposed, but he had to give them cholera toxin, like cholera that causes severe diarrhea. And that in cholera, there's a toxin that causes leaky gut. And so he would give the peanuts with the toxin, and the toxin made the gut leaky, and then the peanuts would get absorbed, and then the animals would develop anaphylaxis. Well, I know from my work, I did some work in horses, actually, as well as in animals, because I was interested in the disease in horses. But and I was interested in the possibility that fructose could cause gut leak. And actually, we and another group showed that sugar causes a leaky gut. So then I said, all these kids are eating sugar, and especially fruit juices. And so they're eating the fruit, drinking the fruit juices, and not only are they getting the bad part of the fructose, but they're going to get a leaky gut. And now when they eat the peanuts, the peanut antigens are going to get into the peanut proteins are going to get into their blood. So I said to Steve, I said, why don't we do an experiment, and let's not give the cholera toxin. Let's just give sugar and see if that, leads to this thing. And when we did it, we need to do more experiments to fully prove it. But the animals anaphylaxed with sugar and peanuts, and we need to do more for statistics, and it's not peer reviewed, but that's what we found. And so I believe that the epidemic of food allergies is also linked with this epidemic of sugar, and that if we reduce sugar intake, we can reduce food allergies. Not fully proven, but I have a lot of evidence to support that.
That's amazing. So, gosh, that wasn't even in your book. I don't remember that story.
No,
so
I didn't.
here we hear it. So
Yeah,
we have such little time now, and I want to make sure I get, Q&A, and we've gone through maybe two of my questions. I have so many, but I want to revert back to women over 50, because
yes.
As you know, with age and menopause coming, we become more insulin resistant. And so we're probably even more predisposed to obesity and diabetes just by age and having that behind us. So we probably need to be even more mindful of the types of sugars that we eat. We've ruled out, okay, anything with fructose or, the high fructose corn syrup that you found in your diets. I mean, sodas, any sodas, not diet sodas, but regular sodas. and just processed foods in general. So, but you did mention in your book also to be aware of other things such as alcohol and salt and umami type foods as well. So taking the perspective for a woman over 50, talk about some of those things that we should be, I don't want to say avoiding completely, but be aware of and be mindful of, assuming they don't have any other, problems or health issues.
Well, yes. So, yeah, I would love to, to talk about this more. Maybe we will have time with another session too, because
Or
I
two.
can't get in. Yeah, I can't get into it too much. But I will tell you this: that what we found was that sugar, fructose, works through a substance called uric acid, and you mentioned this earlier. And uric acid is a normal substance in our blood. And it's broken down from energy. When energy breaks down, it forms this substance. And also like DNA and stuff, RNA, when they break down, they make uric acid, and we normally get rid of it through our through the gut or through the kidney. So we make this substance. And what we discovered, this time we did discover it, we found that that when you eat sugar, that this substance actually is responsible for activating the switch. And so it's doing a whole variety of things. And what's interesting is that women, when normally have a lower uric acid in their blood than men, and that may provide some protection for cardiovascular disease. But once you go through menopause, the uric acid levels go up. And actually, women tend to be more sensitive for the same uric acid than a male, so that they actually may have some disadvantage as that uric acid goes up. And so, I go into this in my book and a lot about uric acid, and David Perlmutter has a book coming out on uric acid, and I think that it's particularly relevant to women over the age of 50. And there, so this pathway, it turns out to be important. And certain foods can raise uric acid and also stimulate fructose production. And one is alcohol, and especially beer. And with beer, it's not just the alcohol; it's the yeast extract, the brewer's yeast that's in there, because that turns out to has a major ability to raise uric acid.
And uric acid, maybe just to clarify too, that is what causes gout, right? And gout,
Yes,
those little
yes,
crystals in your
yes,
joints and very painful,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Just
And
so
so,
people
like
know.
women have a much lower frequency of gout because they have lower uric acids. But actually, data shows that in terms of the switch, that they are more sensitive to if you give the same level of uric acid, women will tend to have look like they have a bigger biologic response. But after menopause, the uric acid comes up, so it's like now it's a double scare. And you're right, alcohol, and postmenopausally, we start seeing a lot more gout occurring in women. And also, if you have kidney disease blocks your ability to get rid of uric acid. So people who have kidney disease, a lot of women, especially over the age of 50 with kidney disease, have a high uric acid and have a risk for gout. And so the uric acid, according to our work, increases the risk for more than just gout, but for high blood pressure and heart disease and diabetes. And so there's a lot of interest in uric acid as being potentially a major risk factor that's kind of unrecognized for these things like heart disease and so forth. And I would be happy to do a session just on uric acid because it's kind of the area that I'm really well known for my work on that.
Yeah.
And then the other big area, which I think you're getting to, is we discovered that, well, we had the insight that fat is not just a source of energy, it's a source of water. And when you burn fat, you make water. And there are a lot of animals that make fat to provide a water source. Like in the desert, they put the fat in their tails or in their humps on their back, like the camel, and they use the fat as a source of water. And whales, and actually like primates that are hibernating in the summer, like in Madagascar, when it's in the dry season, they're using the fat to produce water. And when the birds are migrating, they're getting their water from the fat there. So fat is a source of water. And when we recognized that was a big thing, we started realizing that people who are getting overweight and fat tend to be dehydrated. And that dehydration, low levels of dehydration, is another major stimulus for obesity. And actually, the best thing I can tell you in the last 3 minutes or whatever is the importance of staying well hydrated. Because if you stay hydrated, you can actually reduce the fat. In animals, you can reduce the production of fat to sugar, for example, by giving water. And so being well hydrated is so important.
Wow.
And we recognize that there's a concept called underhydration as opposed to dehydration. And dehydration, you're thirsty and everything's, you have your blood tests are all abnormal. But if you're just mildly dehydrated, you can activate processes to kind of bring everything to normal, but at the expense of turning on the processes to conserve water. And when you do that, one of the ways to conserve water is to make fat, because you make fat, you can hold on to water. So you're, unbeknownst, you're actually stimulating the switch by being underhydrated. So take a water bottle with you wherever you go. Drink a glass of water before you eat a meal, and it will probably have a very significant benefit.
Wow. I love that. That's such a simple hack that people don't even think
Yeah.
about. Being dehydrated can turn on the fat switch. So let's
Yes.
just drink water, even if you're probably not very thirsty yet, because it'll probably be too late. But I'm gonna open up the panel. For the next 5-10 minutes, I would like everyone who's here, if you have a question, to please take advantage, because we have very, very little time left, because we definitely need to have a part 2, because we didn't even cover uric acid. We didn't cover what I wanted to ask about obesity. To cure obesity, you can increase energy production in your mitochondria. I want to hear more about knocking out fructokinase so that we just don't have to get fat and we can still eat our sugar too. And one question I do have before I open the panel, and I'll try to make hopefully a short answer, but I want to ask, you talked about in your book the evolution of how we have this gene mutation, and that helped us accelerate the fat storage by eating just some fruit. But do you think in the future we would adapt to our new abundance of food, abundance of fruit, abundance of fructose, and have a different gene mutation so that we can tolerate all of this?
Yes, I think you're right. So what's happened is, evolution is a very powerful process that tries to optimize health. And so there was a period of time in the past when there was when humans, our ancestors, went through a very serious period of starvation. I write about in the book. There was a mutation that occurred then that made us sensitive to sugar, and that allowed us to survive that. There are actually more than one time, and so now we're very sensitive to sugar, and now we're also eating a lot of sugar. So we can already see some evidence of genetic changes that are occurring to kind of help adapt to reduce. To help fix this issue where we're now a lot of people are getting disease from eating too much sugar. So I think that, but we probably have to wait thousands of years for that to happen. So I think what we really need to do is to implement. There's ways to not activate the switch where you can still have a great diet. And there's ways to reverse the problems as well. And so you're exactly right. There are solutions for us. We don't have to wait for a mutation, But I think that if we gave it enough time, there probably would be a correction for sure.
Yeah, I was wondering if that's possible. We can talk more about that in part two, but I'm going to ask, so I'm going to open up the mic for Samantha. She has a question here.
Hi.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I was I got cut. Thank you so much. It was really interesting. I don't know anything about science, but my dad was a physicist, and he always said that when you eat something sweet, you should drink a lot of water with your sweet. And so I don't know if what you just said about hydration, is it something that is
Well, you
part
are
of that?
your father was very smart, and because actually, when you eat sugar, it actually causes dehydration. We actually did studies. If you give a soft drink, it does not hydrate you. You know, when you drink water, you hydrate yourself. The way we measure hydration was we measure the amount of the concentration of salt in your blood. And when you get dehydrated, the salt concentration goes up because the water concentration goes down, if you understand. And so if your salt concentrations go up in your blood, you get thirsty, and soft drinks actually do that. They will actually increase your salt concentration. They will activate this process that makes you thirsty. So soft drinks are not hydrating. They are dehydrating. And if you drink sugar or eat a lot of sugar, it is going to make you thirsty. And so you want to drink lots of water if you're going to eat sugar. Or wiser, you eat just less sugar.
Yeah, it's like alcohol.
Yeah. Yeah, that also makes you thirsty.
One other question from Nadia, because it's in the mute and you can ask.
Hi, I was hoping you would read it for me, but thank you so much for this presentation. It's fantastic. I'm just wondering about what you were saying, that glucose can impact fructose, that eating glucose or starches, more importantly, because a lot of people, as you said, might cut out sugar, but they're still eating certain starches that just get converted to what we're trying to avoid anyway. And so I'm interested in that. How do these things affect fructose? And does that mean that overeating in general, so eating too much protein, eating ginormous salads, which were, this kind of concept, you can eat as much as you want if it's loads and loads and loads of vegetables, which I think is the wrong message as well. Does that have an impact?
Well, I think you're exactly right. I talk a lot about this in the book. There are certain foods for sure that activate the switch, and there are other foods that don't. And so there is a way to do a diet with minimal activation of the switch. There's even ways to eat foods where so we haven't gotten into this, but like it's driven by the concentration of fructose that the liver sees. And so there's ways that you can eat foods that have sugar, like natural fruits, for example, where you won't get the effect of the fructose. And that's because the intestine actually acts as a shield for the first 5 grams or so of sugar. It actually inactivates the first 5 grams. So when you eat a natural fruit, you won't actually get much fructose to your liver if you're only eating a 4 to 6 gram fruit, a fruit that has 4 to 6 grams fructose. So there's a lot of ways to develop a diet where you can eat as much as you want of certain foods. Other foods you got to be very careful about. Sometimes you have to be very careful about how fast you eat a food. If you are going to eat a dessert, the problem is that people love desserts and they eat it fast, and it makes a difference because it relates to how much fructose you absorb and how fast. But I go into, maybe we can talk about that another time, or if you get my book, you'll be able to see this in detail.
Book it's a very, very detailed, actually. It'll tell you gram per gram what to do. Yeah. And do you have time for one last question?
Yeah. Yeah, I do.
Okay, Magdalena.
Hello again. I'm very happy to listen to your presentation because I agree with everything what you said. I'm practicing this healthy lifestyle as well, try to avoid sugars, starches, carbs, and so on. I was like you, Zora, checking my glucose spike, sugar spikes with Freestyle Libre. And I must say that everything was fine if I was not eating, let me say, this kind of foods, and of course also not fruits. So I guess that maybe would be great if you say some hacks, what to do besides drinking a lot of water and so on, and avoid, if possible. What are the hacks if people who cannot avoid, who are not maybe so disciplined, to avoid this kind of foods, what to do, what is the best to prevent maybe from, let me say, negative side effects?
Okay, well, I mean, so for example, if you have like a continuous glucose monitor, if you did that and you can measure your glucose, you could try to find what carbs, everybody's slightly different in how they handle it. And so you might be able to find certain carbs that are bad for you and certain that are good for you. For example, and also like sometimes, like I have a glucose monitor, and I found that if I eat a slice of bread, my glucose goes up to a level that will convert to fructose. But if I spread it with avocado or something, I slow the absorption, and suddenly I don't get that glucose spike, and so I know it's actually safe.
Mixed with fats, right?
Yeah. Another example is if you're going to eat foods that's salty, I know that as soon as you get thirsty, if you eat a food that's salty, as soon as you feel thirst, you've actually activated part of the switch. So it'd be much better, like if you're going to eat some pretzels or some salted nuts, I don't recommend salted nuts. I would eat regular nuts, unsalted nuts. But if you did, you should drink water first so that you don't, because you don't want to get thirsty. So if you eat salty food, then you get thirsty, and then you drink to get rid of the thirst, you've actually activated the process. So if you drank water first, you actually would not. Another thing, we did a study with apple juice where we gave the apple juice over 5 minutes or over a 1 hour period. And if you drank the apple juice over a 1 hour period, it was the effect to activate this process was really, really minimal compared to drinking it fast. So I don't recommend juices, to be honest, but if you're going to drink a juice, sip it, do it slowly. Try to.
That's hard.
Don't just down it. But it's almost. I mean, I love fresh orange juice. Oh my gosh, it's like gone, and so but it's not good.
Here in Spain, sometimes, well, I'm actually in Portugal now, but in Spain, they serve orange juice with a little packet of sugar in case it's not sweet enough. That's just horrifies me.
yeah, that's not good.
What about smoothies, which are so popular lately? I'm against, but many.
Yeah, I am against them too.
Many people are posting these stories about how to make a very healthy fruit smoothie and so on. And I think this is kind of trend now with these smoothies, but I don't think it's healthy.
Yeah, the juice bars, exactly right. I totally agree with you. I mean, there's some some people do carrot juice and stuff. I don't know how much sugar is in there. I would have to figure it out. But I'll tell you that you're totally right. Juices and smoothies are a problem. I had a patient who was following a great diet, except she drank smoothies. She would go on a walk and come back and have a smoothie every day. I just cut out the smoothie, and she started losing very significant amount of weight. And so yeah.
I agree with
right on the money.
Look, I'm very strict, but I did like a test with me. I'm eating fruits only in the morning and more or less berries or an apple, one piece, and that's it. I don't eat other time of the day. I don't eat other fruits and so on. But I cut in the past, let me say for a week, all kind of fruits, no berries, no apple. And I can tell you that after 7 days, it was amazing that I saw on my body how more tight it was. Like, you know, this small little, how to say, little bit of weight, which is not the weight, but it was gone in a week. Just to cut this little piece of fruit in the morning, it's incredible. So you can see really what kind of difference it makes when you cut the sugar.
Yeah.
Out of
And there are some fruits, you know, I have a list in my book of the fruits that are very low in sugar. And a lot of these fruits, like blueberries, for example, can carry a lot of substances that are quite healthy. So there, you know, there's different kinds of fruits. There's fruits that are not good. There are fruits that are sort of, you know, in between. And there are fruits that, you know, that at least I recommend. But
what would you say about banana? Because banana is supposed to be very good fruit for sport people, you know. I think it's not okay, but many of people are putting in their smoothies or
yeah, I love bananas personally, but they don't like me. So when I eat one, my glucose goes up. So even though they're filled with potassium and all these things that are so good for health, for me you know, I'm one of the people who really get a high glucose spike with it. So
Everybody's different, huh?
yeah, everybody. Yeah, some people can eat bananas without issues, and you know, the bananas also they ripen, they get really sweet. So, you know, if you eat more of a greenish banana, the amount of sugar is probably much less. So there probably is a way to eat a banana if you,
But it
you
won't
just
taste good.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to
All
finish
right.
off with this Woody Allen quote. I don't know if you ever heard of his secret to longevity. Have you heard of this?
No, I want to hear.
He said the secret to longevity is to give up eating all the things that life is worth living for,
Yeah.
including
You know, I'll
bananas.
tell you, I have one too. Jack LaLanne said, if it tastes good, spit it out.
That was also in the book. I love
Yeah.
that one. Well, I'm going to
yeah.
have to let you go. I know you have a meeting right now, but I just want to let people know if they want to find out more information about you, you have a website, drrichardjohnson.com, and please go and get the book starting February 8th. I highly, highly recommend it. It was such a joy to read. You're such a wonderful storyteller. It's called Nature Wants Us to Be Fat, and you can find that on Amazon, or you can find it on benbellabooks.com, and I will have these links in the show notes as well. So read it, guys. Wonderful read. Thank you so much, Dr. Johnson, for giving your time. And I'm going to contact you for a part 2, please. Okay?
Okay. Sounds wonderful. Thank you, Zara.
Have a great
Bye.
day.
Nice meeting you all.
Much.